Thank you very much. I heard recording in progress. I'm very thrilled today to introduce a very good friend. I call him a friend, a very good colleague, and an incredible activist scholar, Trevor Ngwane. For those of you who don't know Trevor, he has a background in the trade unions. He also served as a ward councillor. We won't mention the party, Trevor, but this is where he came to a space in which he began to oppose some of the neoliberal measures and the neoliberal turn that our country was taking. Particularly, he was in opposition to privatization. And this is when he was one of the key members who formed the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee, which is one of South Africa's most formidable and powerful social movements in the wave of the new social movements post-democracy. Trevor Ngwane also has his PhD, and his focus in his PhD, sociology, if I'm not mistaken, was democracy on the margins. It's been published as a book, and I strongly recommend that you have a read of this. He makes some incredible critical points and incredible insights. And today, Trevor is going to be telling us about a major study that was carried out at his center at the University of Johannesburg. So Trevor serves as director of the Center for Sociological Research. And the report was based on how, the story that we all know, how services are inequitable, they're unjust, and how this works in quite a conniving way in the electricity sector. So Trevor's going to be sharing insights from that report. Dan's going to be facilitating. So Dan, let me turn over to you. And Trevor, thank you for giving up your time today, and thank you for allowing us to record this for the YouTube channel. Always amazing to engage with you.
Thank you, Shona, for this wonderful introduction. I would like to welcome Trevor Ngwane to our special seminar series on energy delivery and water delivery in South Africa. Trevor, I'm going to give you 30 minutes to give us your presentation, and then we'll engage with you after the presentation. We'll have a question and answer session where we'll discuss some of the issues that you've highlighted in your presentation. For those that do not know me, my name is Denford Chipongotse. I'm a research fellow at the Center for Civil Society. Thanks again, Trevor, for making time. I know it was such a short notice. I sort of ambushed you, but thank you for making time, and you're very much welcome to the set. Okay, I see your slides. They are showing on our side. So I'll just give you 30 minutes, Comrade Trevor. Tell us about energy racism in South Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. So remember that for me, the Center for Civil Society is like home, because I did my MA at the University of KZN, and I was attached to the Center for Civil Society. That's why I met Shona. At that time, the director was Patrick Bond, who is now with us here in sociology at UJ. So I'll talk about energy racism, and I'll link it to the struggle for eco-socialism in South Africa. That is, to a broader struggle for ecological and social justice. I just put a picture there of some people who call themselves climate activists for a free Palestine. So not only am I highlighting the real burning issue of Palestine, which I think we should all support, but also how climate activists join these issues to each other, as it were. I'm just justifying why, for me, it's so easy to jump from energy racism to the struggle for eco-socialism. But I'll illustrate that in the course of the talk. So I'll just summarize everything and then flesh it out. So as Shona said, in 2022, we published a report called Energy Racism, where we argued that, in fact, there's a special form or kind of load shedding called load reduction, which is targeting Black working class areas. And we thought that this was unfair. I'll go into more detail about this, but the background, especially why energy racism, was that Black working class people, or in their areas in South Africa, they were the people who were laying down the electricity pylons, going down the mines to dig, but they didn't have electricity in their homes. And then, of course, we know that the economy in South Africa was built, if we explain it theoretically, based on what is called the mineral energy complex. So cheap Black labor, cheap electricity to get the gold out of the ground, to energize the factories. And then, of course, social reproduction being borne by Black women, because Black cheap labor was organized through the migrant labor system, especially when it came to the mines. In some instances, also agriculture. So our argument when we said it's energy racism was that the Black working class not only bears the brunt of the energy crisis today through load reduction, but also during the days of apartheid, where, you know, people didn't have electricity and their labor was basically exploited. So we point out to the continuities of oppression from the days of apartheid to today. Okay, I want the slide to move. It's not moving. Oh. Okay, so sorry, colleagues. I think I'll have to reshare or something. Don't know what's happening.
No, that's fine, Trevor. Reshare. Maybe stop the share and start again.
Stop the share. Where do we stop the share?
So at the bottom of in the bottom panel, it says share screen. If you right click on the slide, well, can you not move it forward? Right click and it's not. Is it freezing?
Just press escape on the keyboard.
Escape. Okay. Nothing is working. Okay, maybe pause share first. Share again. Okay, yeah, that's better. Okay, so what I'll do is, because it's a usual problem in this laptop, I'll just maybe reduce this side a bit. Yeah, and then just do it manually. Okay. You'll still see the slides. Yeah, so I was explaining energy racism and how we relate it to what we call racial capitalism by pointing out that Black working class areas were suffering from let's say, energy deprivation from the days of apartheid, and this seems to be continuing to today. So I'm just making the same point here that, you know, for example, Alexandra was called the Dark City. Many Black townships were called Dark City during apartheid, exactly because there were no street lights, no electricity to speak of. Now, I wanted to just share something because I'm speaking from Soweto, that in fact, the electrification of Soweto began in 1979, although for most Black working class townships and areas, it took place much later. So in Soweto, this happened after the June 16, 1976 student uprising. So after that, there was a puppet mayor called David Tebehadi, who was, I think, working closely with, let's say, Urban Foundation, other liberal institutions, and they felt that Soweto had to be electrified. And with the shock of 1976, the apartheid regime relented and agreed to this. I think some of the money was also directly from, let's say, English capital. Oppenheimer, Anglo-American, through the Urban Foundation. In the 1980s, there was a big uprising again from 1984 to 1986, 87, which was the last big uprising before the demise of apartheid. So we find that many Black townships were still in darkness. The only light they had at night was what was called Apollo lights, which were huge, tall, you know, I don't know, lights you can see there. Basically, they were put there for the purpose of surveillance and to allow the police and the security forces to move around at night. And the whole point was repression and repressing, you know, insurgency. And then also at Arab, during the 80s, during this uprising, P.W. Botha, who was the prime minister or president of South Africa of the apartheid regime, called the Groot Crocodile, the great crocodile. He came with his strategy, total strategy, to fight against the anti-apartheid forces. So for him, everything had to be used, you know, education, culture, infrastructure, etc. It was at that time that Eskom, which is the, let's say, state-owned entity, now and at that time to provide electricity in South Africa, Eskom was integrated into the security establishment structures of the apartheid regime. So all this installing Apollo lights was done by Eskom in conjunction with municipalities as part of state security to fight the insurgents. Of course, starting with the electrification of Soweto, where white monopoly capital, so to speak, said, no, we need reforms. Things are going bad, apartheid. P.W. Botha also recognized through his total strategy, you know, that multifaceted approach to stop the undermining of apartheid. So here it is, winning hearts and minds strategy. And I'm sure part of it also involved electrifying Black areas. So in 1994, we got our independence, uhuru, freedom, andla. And I've put copies or images of the 1994 ANC election poster or posters. On the right is one in isiZulu, since you guys are in Zululand, in KZN. Vote ANC. Impilo engcono kithi sonke, a better life for all. And then, okay, you know, because it's elections, there are various posters, but the one on the right was the main one, you know, a better life for all. But they would have one variations like free quality education for all, or free water for all. So that was the promise, you know. Housing for all, healthcare for all. Lo and behold, within 2 years of the ANC taking power, they moved away from their election manifesto, which was called the Reconstruction and Development Program, or was based on the policy Reconstruction and Development Program, which was a mildly expansionist, pro-poor, pro-working class program to gear the growth, employment, and redistribution program, which was inspired by neoliberal ideas. So the former director of CCS, Patrick Bond, wrote that famous book, Early Transition from Apartheid to Neoliberalism in South Africa. So he was talking about how, you know, in many ways, the ANC moved away from pro-poor, pro-working class distributionist policies to neoliberal, top-down, trickle-down, profit-first economic policy. Later, he wrote a book which is telling in its title, Talk Left, Walk Right. So that's important because, you know, the ANC would still continue talking about a better life for all. They're doing it now during this election campaign season, but in reality, on the ground, they have mostly implemented anti-working class policies. So when it came to electricity, Sean mentioned the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee. So one of the implications of neoliberalism was squeezing the poor to pay for services. User must pay policies. The idea that if you cannot pay for a service, you should not get it. So with electricity, for some reason, they started with electricity in Soweto. They started cutting off electricity, you know, for those who were behind with their payments. The main reason the people who were behind with their payments, besides being poor, mostly unemployed, remember the black working class in particular. When I say black, I'm using the Steve Biko definition, including colored people, so-called colored, people of Indian background, Indians, as you know, in South Africa, and Africans, like me, yeah. So all of us were suffering under apartheid. So Steve Biko said we should all unite. So black meant those people. So there was this idea now that, as the ANC had promised, we black people are now going to get electricity, houses, education, as you saw clearly in the poster, free education. But in fact, neoliberalism or neoliberal policy was pointing to the opposite direction. No, you must pay. And also, part of neoliberalism was what was called, or is called, market-related pricing, which means that there was a sudden increase in the price of basic services because now they were provided on a profit market basis. So we had these organizations like the Anti-Privatization Forum, which the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee was part of. In Durban, where the Concerned Citizens Forum, led by Fatima Meer, Professor Fatima Meer. In Cape Town, for example, we had the anti-eviction campaign. Nationally, we had the Landless People's Campaign, all of them fighting in defense of the people's right to services, which Freedom Uhuru had promised them, and which the people themselves thought is what they were fighting for when they fought against apartheid. Now, the ANC, once it was in power, changed its tune. I've indicated they moved from RDP to GEAR. They now came up with a policy called, or a campaign called the Masakane campaign. So Masakane is Zulu for let's build together. So Nelson Mandela himself championed this campaign. So the aim of the campaign was to persuade, according to Mandela and the ANC, to persuade the Black working class to start paying for services. Now, this made sense to them because they had moved to neoliberal policy. And they also believe that, for example, in Soweto, people for a long time had a rent boycott. They were not paying for services, number one, because they didn't receive adequate, satisfactory services under apartheid. Number two, they were using that as a weapon against the apartheid state, the rent boycott. So now Mandela felt that we're free now, people must learn to pay for services. So this idea was elaborated to say that Black working class people during the struggle against apartheid had developed or acquired a culture of non-payment. Okay, I'm sorry, there's a spelling error. A culture of non-payment. And then they had to be weaned of this culture. Later, this approach, that is why there I've got questions. Was it blame shifting? Was it blaming the victim? Was it scapegoating? Because due to many reasons, mismanagement, corruption, poverty among those who are supposed to pay, and many other reasons. Also, for example, Eskom was told to borrow money from the markets, from banks, in order to build new power stations. You know, many of these state-owned entities like Eskom, South African Airways, Genel, they got into trouble. Eskom had a huge debt. I think at one point it was 500 billion rands. So now, and this, of course, if the state-owned entity is broke, it creates many problems, including not enough money for maintenance, even not enough money to pay its own workers. So suddenly now we're told that the problem was the reason for these crises in service delivery was the culture of non-payment. That is why, you know, some people like myself, we thought there was an element of blame shifting. Also, many of the people who were said not to have a culture of payment, they were poor, they were unemployed. Indeed, under the ANC government, poverty levels started to rise again, inequality increased, unemployment increased. So, you know, these people who had been victims under apartheid were finding themselves victims under the democratic order. Scapegoating, yeah, I think blame shifting is that. A writer, Antina van Schnitzler, wrote a book focusing on water. She called it Democracy's Infrastructure, Technopolitics and Protest After Apartheid. So she was basically arguing that just as the apartheid state, for example, Total Onslaught, had approached infrastructure as part of state hegemony, state control, state security. Politically, the provision of infrastructure was playing the same role under the new government. I don't have time to go into that argument, but it's an important argument. So when we conducted the research into load shedding, we found that there was a special program called load reduction. So I'll just read the definition of load reduction. We all know load shedding is to stop the grid from collapsing because of shortage of electricity supply. Load reduction is used to reduce the increasing demand for electricity that is supplied to the public. This is achieved by cutting off the electricity of residents who cannot afford to pay their monthly electricity bills. And then where are these non-paying citizens found, residents found? Of course, in Black working class areas, in townships, in villages, Mutu, in shack settlements, Gugulethi, Wamakuta, Lamontville, in those townships and areas. Emalukazi. Okay, I was born in Durban, so I'm getting nostalgic. Yeah. So basically, over and above load shedding, Black working class people were finding themselves having this program of load reduction. And indeed, here is a copy of the ESCOM load reduction schedule in Gauteng. You won't find Sentin there. You won't find, you know, I don't know, in Durban, what is Umhlanga Rocks? Yeah. In Cape Town, you won't find Constantia. So we have Ivory Park, which is basically Tembisa. You have Soweto. You have West Rand, like Fleurhof. So basically, Black working class areas, or let's say historically Black working class areas. So we're thinking as the research team, how can we explain this? It just so happened that at that time, there was a lot of talk about the murder, public execution of George Floyd in the USA and the rise of Black Lives Matter. And remember that Black Lives Matter, many academics started being interested in the theory of racial capitalism, which is a theory an analyst or a sociologist called Cedric J. Robinson had come up with, and also a concept which Martin Legasik, Dave Hampson, who lived in Devon. I recently saw Dave Hampson in Rhode Island. He's well and good for those who are interested in him. And also people like Harold Wolpe, you know, they came up with this idea of racial capitalism. So in investigating this concept of racial capitalism as researchers, you know, we had now our data showing that Black working class areas were being penalized. We came across the ideas of Robert D. Bullard, who, I nearly said by the mercy of God, by coincidence, also came to UJ. He was honored, you know, with an honorary degree. So we got the opportunity to take him to Soweto. He addressed the community meeting there of the United Front. He had written a book called Dumping in Dixie, Dixie being the South, you know, the racist South in the US. And he came up with the concept of environmental racism because he found that Black Americans or African Americans, their areas tended to be built next to dumping sites or to the west, you know, part of town. It's the same there in Kennedy Road. Kennedy Road, I know it's next to Clare Estates. It's also next to the big landfill there. I just can't remember its name. But you are in Devon, you know the landfill I'm talking about. So that is how we came with this idea of energy racism. We had looked at concepts like energy poverty, energy insecurity. We found them that they were good, but we thought energy racism was the most appropriate. So with my time almost up, I'll just divert a bit and talk about how South Africa, Eskom, you know, are responsible for greenhouse gas emissions in Africa, in the world. So it's just connecting the dots. I won't go into great detail about this. But since we're in Devon, you know, climate activists, people fighting for electricity, energy activists like myself, because we are responsible people, we also notice that the electricity which we fight for is generated at great expense to the earth, environmentally, but also to human life. So climate change, global warming, now people are suffering the consequences, especially the Black working class. KZ flooding in 2022, which is extreme weather patterns related to climate change. One point which Patrick Bond said in a seminar was, he said, only Black people died during this flooding. So I don't know, you guys will know better than me if it's true or not, but certainly the majority of those who died were Black working class people. As you can see, the flooding next to shack settlements, flimsy structures. So this brings me to the end of my presentation, where I connect this whole thing under the struggle for clean, safe, reliable, affordable energy for all. This struggle is spearheaded by climate activists like Climate Justice Coalition. And they've got a campaign called Green Eskom Campaign. So they want Eskom to continue being a state-owned entity, but generate renewable energy, safe energy, clean energy, move away from fossil fuels. The idea is like Million Jobs campaign, whereby, when we make or build solar panels, wind farms, we can create jobs, basically linking the movement away from fossil fuels, from carbon-heavy energy generation to carbon light, carbon neutral energy generation, but linking it to economic development. Because as you know, the climate denialists tend to use jobs as an excuse for not moving to climate neutral technologies. So we believe that, I believe that eco-socialism should be our vision, whereby production methods in factories, the production of energy, transport should all take into account the need for the transition, the just transition to carbon neutral technologies. So thank you very much.